I'd like to welcome everybody, and I'd like to thank Newent Area U3A for Historic Building Group for hosting this Andy's talk. But that's all I'm going to say. And Mary's going to do the introduction for me. Okay.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I'm the secretary of the Gloucester Building Recording Group. Yes, Diane has asked me to say the following. She'd like to thank Newent U3A for hosting this talk. Please, could you mute your microphones, and when this talk starts, turn off your videos. This will help with reception, especially if the internet starts going slow. After the talk, please put them back on again, and Andy will obviously leave his on, Diane and me as well. If you want to ask questions about the talk, please could you put them in the chat box at the bottom, and Andy will go to those at the end of the talk. And just to introduce our speaker, Dr. Andy Moyer is a dendrochronologist, I can just about say it, and director of Tree Ring Services based in Micheldean, in the Forest of Dean. As Diane says, where else, what better place to be a dendrochronologist. He's a postdoctoral research fellow at Brunel University and regularly publishes on the tree ring research that he has been undertaking. This is a personal comment. Those of us in another society called the Vernacular Architecture Group are very used to Andy putting in his dendro reports into the annual journal. He is chairman of the Gloucester Building Recording Group, who have been engaged in recording buildings and researching the documentary record for buildings in Newent for some time. So over to Andy, and I think there's a few more things for me to say at the end, Diane.
Andy's put them on a slide,
right?
So it's been taken care of. Thanks, Mary.
Okay, thank you. Over to Andy.
Hello there, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in. The first bit I've got to do is hopefully share my screen so you can see the slideshow. So it could all go wrong at this point. I'll try sharing now. Shout out if you can't see anything though. Right. Share. There we go.
Oh, God.
And then we need to start the slideshow. And then make it full size. So now I hope all of you can see the title screen and maybe me sitting on the corner somewhere. Does that all look all right, Diane?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah? Everyone happy with that then? Okay. At some point, I might well use a pointer laser pen as well. So there should be a little red dot that you can all see there now at the beginning as well on that title thing. And I'll just point out one or two things on the screen, hopefully, as we go along. So, title of the lecture, A New Timeline for Newent. I'm just looking at the Newent results. Dendrochronology project in Newent has covered three main areas. In Gloucester has covered Newent, Tewkesbury and Gloucester. Now we had a meeting, a Zoom meeting like this last month, and we covered some of the Tewkesbury results. This is the first outing that anyone's had for the Newent results for the tree ring dates. And in a couple of months' time, we'll be doing another one of these, hopefully for the Gloucester results. So this is the middle section of the results. And I'm going to break up this lecture basically into 4 bits. If you saw the Tewkesbury one last month, I'm sorry for the introduction, which discusses tree ring dating. But as it's such a fundamental aspect of this project, you need to understand it. So it's for people that haven't seen that one. So I apologise, that is a repeat. But then we go into the medieval buildings of Newent, which is all the new results. As we go through these sections, I'm going to introduce a little bit about stylistic dating, and we'll just cover a section on stylistic dating in the middle. Then we'll go on to the post-medieval buildings dated in the project, and then just a final slide discussing how you can get involved if you want to get involved with the project. None of these sections should last more than 10-15 minutes, so it will hopefully just keep you awake as we're going along. So even if you have heard the introduction before, please bear with us. So I can just repeat the thank you to the Historic Building Group of Newent in the U3A and Diana for inviting me to this talk to give the results of the Gloucester Dendrochronology project. We were running through 2020, but for obvious reasons, we've tried extending it to 2021 because we haven't been able to complete all aspects of it. But we did, during 2020, manage to get into a lot of buildings, assess them and tree ring date them, hence these results. So the reason for the project was Tewkesbury, Newent and Gloucester contain a lot of timber frame buildings that people really aren't aware of in comparison to places like Shropshire and Herefordshire. We're a bit of a poor cousin. People aren't so aware of the amazing timber framing that survives. So that was one of the reasons for starting this project, which involved a large aspect of tree ring dating. Now, the whole point of tree ring dating is to get precise dates for buildings. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about how we do that for the methodology so you can understand how we do get these precise dates. The term dendrochronology, I usually call it just tree ring analysis, as it's easier to pronounce. It comes from three root words: dendron, tree; chronos, time; and ology, the study of. And it's really just a science that uses tree rings to get exact year information out of them. We're not so interested in the age of trees, i.e. counting the amount of rings in it. We actually do measure them, individual rings. And this technique was pioneered in the 1920s, but still not so many people have heard of it in comparison to C14 carbon radiocarbon dating, which started in the 1950s. Now, our science, tree ring analysis, is based on the relationship of weather and climate. If you get a good year, a wide ring, a warm, wet year is a good year, equates to it, and you'll get a wide ring. If you have a bad year, a cool or very dry year, you're going to get a narrow ring. So if you think of the 76 drought or the 80 drought, a lot of trees in this country are going to put on narrow rings. And that is how it enables us to date. So I've just shown some cores at the bottom of this slide. They're very thin pencil-like cores, about the size of my little finger, or your little finger if you hold it up. So structurally, they do almost no damage to the buildings that we're taking cores from. So we don't go in with chainsaws and chop down the building to get a result. We do leave them standing. English heritage tends to frown upon chopping down buildings just to get a date. So they're very small pencil-like cores, and you can hopefully see on those cores the light bands and dark bands. Now the light bands relate to spring growth, your spring sapwood rising up the tree, and then the darker colour is the later summer growth. And all we do in this technique, it's fundamentally very simple, is measure the width of each ring. And if you follow those very thin lines up to the top half of the screen, the wiggle plots, you'll basically see a pattern of wide and narrow rings corresponding to the ring widths that we've seen down below. And those wiggle matches are what we basically run along each other and try to get a match. Now there's lots of statistics that you can throw out on this, but your eye is quite sharp, and it's a unique pattern that a tree, once you measure about 50 rings, that will produce. So I don't know, if you look at the bottom half of this screen, you'll see a black line, which is one tree ring sequence, and a blue line, which is a second one. Very much like people, trees are not the same. They all undergo different things in their lifetime, and you are never going to get two identical sequences. But hopefully, looking at that, you can see there are common raised points, the peaks, which correspond to the good years, and lower, narrow rings down the bottom, which correspond to poor years. Here we've got coinciding low point, and coinciding high points. As I said, if you have a 50-year sequence, it's very much like a barcode. It should only match in one place in history. So that enables us to get a date for each ring in our sequence. But that isn't telling us when the tree was felled. Now, to do that, to get the precise date that the tree was actually felled, you need to identify the outermost ring, which is just on the end there. So where the black pen mark is that I'm highlighting now on these cores is a transition between the darker heartwood and the sapwood on the outside of a tree. And you always get an inch on oak, and I am talking about oak mainly here. You get an inch on the outside of that tree, which lies underneath the bark. Now, if we can see bark and we've got that outermost ring, we can actually tell you the half, the quarter ring for spring, the half ring for summer, or the full ring for winter. We can actually give you precision on when that tree was felled. If we haven't got bark and woodworm, you can see a few woodworm holes in this section. Quite often you will just have the heartwood-sapwood boundary surviving. And if we've got only heartwood-sapwood boundary surviving, statistically you get between 9 and 41 rings in the south, which we generally apply to it, to bark. So that would give us a sapwood range. So we either tell you the year the tree was felled to the actual season, or if there's no bark, we'd have to give you a range, probably about a 20-year range. So, interpreting the date of construction. Now, you might say the tree being felled at that date, does that relate straight away to a date of construction, or did they season? Now, most of the evidence we get, where we've got documentary evidence, where we've got matching dates, date stones, for instance, and even if you look at the timbers in medieval buildings, you will see shrinkage cracks in them, warping, that says they were used green. They didn't have power tools back in the medieval period, and they would tend to use the hand tools and shape their timbers as soon as they felled out, or were felled, sorry. In the pitch here, you can see them shaping it. The bark tends to come off easier, and it's much easier to remove wood while it's non-seasoned. And if you have any timbers in your building that are oak, you'll know that once they're seasoned, it goes absolutely rock hard like concrete. So we're very confident that the year, or very soon after that the tree was felled, would be the year of construction. So we got a great bulk of these tree ring dates across the country. What we did back in 2014. And on my slide here, you'll see how some projects that have occurred, tree ring dating projects already, like Shropshire and in Oxfordshire, where you've had 203 buildings dated. A very early one in Kent, 252 buildings dated. Hampshire, 249 buildings dated. But back in 2014, not a huge amount of tree ring dating had been done in Gloucester. So part of our project was basically to balance this up and increase the number, so we were more aware of what the patterns of construction in buildings were. So this is the picture, this map back in 2014, and this is the picture as of last year, when we almost had completed the project. We've actually done a few more buildings now, so we could increase this more. But as you can see, from 2014, 53 in Gloucester, we've gone to 153 in Gloucester, and about 100 buildings is the minimum you want for a county to get a good sort of generalized picture. So we're getting there, 153 at the moment, but you can still see some of the other counties are way ahead of us on dating. And some counties, for instance, the Isle of Wight and Dorset, are still very, very low, very little known about. So if you're in one of these areas, a lot of work needs to be done. But Gloucester now is up to 153, so we're starting to see patterns, we're starting to understand more the picture of timber framing. But here we're going to condense it right down just to Newent. So medieval buildings of Newent. If you don't know Newent, there's just a stylized map here. We've got the High Street, the centre of Newent here, and then going up Broad Street there. So we're going to start at the West End and walk down...
East End.
Sorry, East End, and walk down Church Street towards the centre. The first one that you start from the East End is 32 Church Street, and that's the first building we're going to have a look at here. So there you can see it. Listed counts as 16th century. Now 16th century is 1501 to 1600. But the outside timbers that you're looking there have been much remodelled. These are all new replacement timbers, which you can see clearly from the inside. They don't show the weathering that a medieval building would show. So they've been replaced, but they've actually been replaced pretty much like for like. These barge boards, despite the fact they're new, probably copied the originals. These braces probably copied them all. And we've got, I'm afraid with terminology in building archaeology, it's a bit of a bugbear, but I've got to bring it in. I will try to introduce it slowly. What we've got here is a fan truss. So there's our tie beam going across, a collar, and we've got one crown strut with two raking struts either side. Now our term for this is a fan truss. Now the reason I'm introducing that straight away is there's a lot of these in Gloucester, and there's quite a few just in Newent. So it's something to watch out for that we found quite a lot of. So 32 Church Street, as it says in the listing, much remodelled. Inside though, there are many surviving timbers, original timbers that we can look at. We've got early features such as an open hall. Open hall is where you don't have the floors, you have your fire for heating on the floor of the building and no first floor. It would just rise straight to the roof, and you'd get a lot of smoke on the rafters. So smoke blackening. We see that in 32 Church Street, so we know it was an open hall. We've got the fan truss, as I said, here in grey, just to highlight it even further for you, which you can see on the building. We've also got lovely curved braces, which tend to be an earlier feature, medieval as opposed to post-medieval. And we've got a lovely jetty, which again tends to be an earlier feature. So back to this fan truss that I was talking about. So this structure, here are the plots across the country of tree ring dates for a fan truss in black here. So you can see they predominantly range from 1400 up to 1470. There is a spatter later here that we've got. But when we started the project, we knew of the other fan trusses in the other counties over here. And the white plots you're seeing here are the ones we found through this project purely in Gloucester. So these include the new examples. But you can see straight away, stylistically, we knew that fan trusses should be between 1400 to 16, maybe 1470. And so that's what we'd project estimated initially, the date for this building, not just using the fan truss, but it was certainly a factor, around the middle of that peak at around the 1420s. So that's what we estimated our date was. And the next slide is going to show you what we've actually tree ring dated it to. So we estimated 1420. We've actually got a tree ring date, what's that, 3 years off, which isn't bad of 1417. Exact year, i.e. we had bark, so we know the exact year that the trees were felled, and we're interpreting that the following year, 1417, would have been the year of construction. So we've got a fan truss dated to 1417, adding and reinforcing what we've seen in other places, that these are an early feature. Now, we couldn't get into the whole of Church Street, which actually extends with a hall range going to the left there. But you can see the front door here, which is part of 32 Church Street. And we just managed to date some of the timbers that link across from the separate building on the left, the hall, which is 30. And we've got a tree ring date for that of 1404 to 1306. So just to go back to the date for Church Street, 32, 1417 is slap bang in the middle of that range. Now, we didn't find bark on any of those timbers from 30 Church Street, but the range suggests it could be coeval, and it's likely to have been built at the same time. If we can get into 30 Church Street, we'd hopefully be able to confirm that with stylistic evidence and just look at the features to see if they're the same and whether it links. But it's more than likely that this whole hall range and wing were built at the same time, 1417. So that's our first building we've looked at. Then we move on, 25 to 27 Church Street. Now again, hopefully you spotted by now, as I've reinforced it enough, this little feature here, the fan truss, a single straight stud with two sloping studs either side, which we're calling the fan truss. Now this is listed as 17th century. I think mainly from the range here again, which is very incomplete and we couldn't get a date on. So we're looking only at this cross wing here on the left of this building for the date, and that's the only thing that we could get tree ring dating information for. So what are the features that we've got with this, this left wing? Again, we're pretty sure it was an open hall. There's smoke blackening up in the roof, which suggests it's an early building. We've got the fan truss, and here you can see from the inside of the hall range, it shows it just as well and clear, this lovely fan truss feature. We've got close studding on the front here, using lots and lots of timber. Tends to be an early feature of showing off your wealth. Instead of parking your Porsche outside your building, you would show it off, your wealth, your status, with lots of timber. So this is a nice early feature as well. We've got curved wind braces. I keep saying, or I will keep saying, curved features tend to be early medieval, not post-medieval. They would tend to go straight later. So you can see these beautiful curved wind braces here. And again, we've got a jetty. So all in all, quite similar to 32 Church Street. Many common features. We've got the open hall, we've got the fan truss. We haven't got the close studding, but we've got curved bracing and we've got the jetty. So early features. So again, with the fan truss feature, we would estimate it somewhere between, and this is what we did when we looked at it, between 14, basically at the peak here, 1420 to the 1460s, is what, just looking at that one stylistic feature, the fan truss, we'd have estimated it. Remember, listed 17th century, so a vast difference there on the listing and the estimate. And it just goes to show you can't always trust your listings. They were often done just from the outside of a building. They wouldn't have had the opportunity to go inside. So many people take the listing as gospel, and it isn't always the case. You can often go into a building and instantly say it's 200-300 years earlier just by going inside. And I think this is one of these examples here with, sorry, that shouldn't read 32 Church Street. That should read 25 to 27 Church Street. There we are. We're back again to the right one. And here's the tree ring date we got for it. There was no bark that we could recover. So we've got a sapwood estimate, a range of between 1404 to 36, which is slap bang in the middle again of our histogram showing dates for the fan truss. So we're really confident now on fan trusses in Gloucester, following the national pattern, as being an early feature. So it's reinforcing, and it's nice when things reinforce each other. So we've got a range there for this fan truss, 25 to 27 Church Street. So we're going to look more now at the stylistic dating, because there were quite a number of buildings in Newent which we got into and we could assess, and we looked at them and we could see early features, but we couldn't get tree ring dates, or we sampled and we got reasonable samples, but we couldn't date them. Tree ring analysis is a lovely science, but as I said, trees are like humans, anything can happen to them during their lifetime. You can have management, which will completely destroy the climate pattern that you will find within a sequence of tree rings, and it won't date. Or, for instance, they can grow very big, what we say, 2-3 foot in only 30 years if they're getting lots of light, and they won't have enough rings. I said we need a sequence like a barcode of 50 rings to date, normally as a minimum for tree ring dating. And it's not always the case. We can get big timbers growing in only, as I said, 30-40 years, and they won't have sufficient rings, so we wouldn't be able to date it. We're looking at 3 buildings, I think it's 4 actually, that we will look at that we'd assessed as probably early, but we couldn't get precise dates for. So we're going to have a look at 14 Broad Street, 3 Culver Street and the Red Lion. Now 14 Broad Street, I was just going to say, if we've got a larger picture of it, it actually has a date on the front there of 1465. Now we've spoken to the owner, he's no idea where that date has actually come from. So until we can do some historical documentary evidence, we don't know where that date has come from. But it was interesting, I think, to find out whether that could be right as part of the project. So as we increase the number of tree ring buildings dated, we are more confident. Now, some of these assessments we went into these buildings were done at the beginning of the project, and we would refine the date more now. But I think it's nicer for your confidence in evidence of stylistic dating if we leave the stylistic dates as to what we assessed when we originally went in at the beginning of the project. So as I say, some of these might be, you probably could refine them a bit more now, but we've kept them as they were originally assessed. We've got in total in the country around 4,000 medieval buildings dated, tree ring dated. And anyone can access these through, if you just put in Dendrochronology, God, even I can't say it now, the Dendrochronology database. But on Gloucester, they won't all be on the database yet because they're not published. We're still in the process of publishing, but we have access now to 153 tree ring dated buildings in Gloucester. And I'm just showing you on this slide the clarification between the medieval and the post-medieval. Many people won't agree with this, but this is what English Heritage state it as: medieval 1066 to 1540. And the post-medieval, I think most people would agree that you lose your medieval building tradition around 1700. But officially, anyway, the post-medieval period goes up to the death of Queen Victoria in 1901. But there's a very clear divide in a lot of instances in building around that dissolution, the 1540 mark here. And you will see a change of style from the earlier period to the post-medieval period. So this is showing all the tree ring dates we've got just for Gloucester. And you can see we've got quite a nice spread now. So we can start to look at some of these wider patterns. Smoke control, as I was mentioning, the open hall, here's just a diagram of it, is a really useful feature. You very rarely get open halls after the 1540 mark. So if you've got smoke blackening on your rafters, you can be almost, across the roof, all the rafters, you're almost certainly an open hall and pre-1550, 1540. If you've got limited, a restricted area where it's you've got blackened rafters, you're likely a smoke bay, which is where they were experimenting with chimneys. Bricks start to come in around this time, but they were also experimenting with timber chimneys, which seems insane with fire hazards, but that's what they did. And then later, around the 1580s, you'll start to get proper chimneys, brick chimneys, introduced into buildings, and the buildings built to accommodate them. But we have this nice, easy to recognize feature that if you've got a smoke blackened roof completely, you're likely to be an open hall or a significant amount of it. If it's a very restricted area, possibly just one bay, it's likely to be this transition period between 1550 and 1600. And if it's a chimney house, in general, it's likely to be after 1600. Now, these are vast generalizations looking at all the data. Please understand you will always get exceptions to the rule. Yeah, you will have earlier chimneys used by the wealthy. If you're a powerful lord, or you're part of the church, you might have access to a lot of wealth. You might be an exception to the rule. So we're looking at generalization here, but smoke control is a useful way to help date your building stylistically. Roof features, we've been talking about the fan truss is a useful feature as well, how your roof is actually formed. Now, the ones we're really talking about here are the fan truss, which we found a lot of in Gloucester and Newent. Here's the more common crown strut, and it seems to be a parallel way of supporting your roof that we found in Gloucester. And I'm just going to hint here about a result in Gloucester, which is 7 College Green, where we found in the same building crown trusses and fan trusses in the same building. So we know that they were being used at the same time. We found in the project a number of buildings that are crown strut and a number that are fan truss. And the dating seems to be about the same period at the moment. The other features, the other types of roof that can come in later or tend to be later are your queen strut roof with 2 vertical struts, and then just the raking struts. Now these can be straight or curved. And the other feature I was saying, curved wind braces tend to change to straight wind braces. These support the roof at around, if you follow the line and just follow it up, it's around the sort of 1580 mark. So these features, crown struts, fan trusses, queen struts, help you narrow down the estimate of a roof by looking at these features and knowing the timelines that they should be used. And that's all stylistic dating is. So it's not rocket science, it's quite a simple science of using existing tree ring dates to narrow down the date ranges for various features. And there's a lot of features, so I'm only covering some here. So undated buildings in Newent. I started off with. So we're going to use stylistic dating to look at these 4 buildings in Newent. 14 Broad Street, which has the date on the top, 1465, interestingly. It's got a fan truss, which we were saying could be, what, the normal range is about 1420 to about 1460. So that date actually on there looks as if it could be right at the moment. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. And then we've got jettying. Sorry, I'm just going to have to, that was the doorbell. I'm just going to have to stop my door. We do apologise for that. We have curved wind braces in the roof. We also have very clearly an open hall with smoke blackened timbers. And an interesting feature is just the crenulation, a real way of showing off on the front. It's actually on this beam where I'm highlighting with the pointer, but it's very weathered and it's quite difficult to see from the street, but it does have this beautiful castle effect crenulation on that beam. And the only reason to do that is to show off your status. It's pure wealth, it's pure showing off. So we're quite certain that this had a high status building. And this is, if you look at the roof here, when I was saying a fan truss, it is a fan truss, but it's actually got 2 additional posts. So there is some variation in that. We found fan trusses with 2 posts, we found them with 3. Most commonly 1. Whether there's a difference in date range for the 1, 2 and 3, hopefully we'll find out during the course of further research. So 14 Broad Street, using these features, the fact it's an open hall, so we're pretty confident it's, you know, pre-1550, the fact it's got jetting, very like 32 Church Street and 25 to 27 Church Street. We're quite confident that it's going to date around the 1430s, which isn't a million miles off this inscribed date on the top. So it'll be very interesting in future to actually try and find out where that date has come from. Now, we did actually sample this building for tree ring dating, and the reason we couldn't get a date for it was it was very fast growing timbers. So they didn't have the 50 years in there. So while they're big, substantial timbers, they were grown very quickly, lots of light, and they had less than the 50 rings required, so we couldn't date it. 3 Culver Street, which from the outside is often the case, doesn't show timber framing. You will often have buildings refronted in brick as they keep up with latest fashions. Inside those, substantial timber framing, lots of surviving. We've got large wall panels with curved bracing. Remember, curved meaning early, normally. We've also got a crown strut. It's actually been cut off at this point, and you can see the later chimney, brick chimney behind it. But this was originally a crown strut roof, and that would have carried on to support the other principal rafter, which is here. But it's just been cut off, basically so they could use the roof space later and you can walk through. But originally it would have looked like this, and they've just actually cut off there. So it's a crown strut. And we've got smoke blackening, which shows originally that this would have been an open hall on these rafters. So again, we took samples from this one to try to tree ring date it. For whatever reason, probably management, we couldn't get a date for it. So we have to use stylistic evidence. Now, I said it's got large panels in the wall framing. We know it's an open hall, so this all pushes it earlier than 1550. If it had small panels, you'd say it's likely to be after the 1560 mark. And if it had decorative panels here, very short period of time, very elaborate flowering of Elizabethan craftsmanship, decorative panels, tends to be quite a close date between around 1580 and sort of 1620 is the only time it seems to have used decorative panels, mainly in the south. In Shropshire, slightly further north, that seems to be a slightly wider range we found. But it's still a very useful dating feature when you find it. So remember decorative panels, they don't always have to be curved like that as well. You can get chevron effects. So 3 Culver Street, because of its crown post, because of its smoke blackening, because of its large panels and curved bracing, we've estimated it around the sort of 1480s mark. And as I said, at the moment, we can't tree ring date the samples. They've actually got a lot of rings in there, but there's the potential that they might match some of our chronologies as we develop more in the county. We're still sampling buildings, we're still getting more. So there is a chance that it might date in the future. The Red Lion, another interesting one, which from the outside, a much later frontage. And if you just look down the side passage where I'm putting the marker there, you can actually see a hint of a jetty. which me and Diane saw, I think, with a torch when we looked at it. But from the outside, it doesn't give much of a clue of its early date. Inside, we actually found, again, a nice crown strut roof. Now, it's actually got two wings going back, one this side and one the far side. The front has been completely altered, and it's a much later date, but the earlier wings seem to, in the roof, survive, and we could find, there we can see it, a crown strut, again, single strut, and hopefully you can see the original partitioning there with the wattle and daub, and you can also see blackening on it, smoke blackening, saying that this was likely originally an open hall. Again, in the roof, we've got a nice surviving set of curved wind braces running all the way along, blackened rafter there. So it's quite a complete roof. It's quite complete with timbers in the roof, but very little on the wall frame to date it. And we would have loved to have sampled this, but as you can see from this top image, which is oak, and you can see the sapwood there, so we know we're almost on the bark there, but if you just make out the light and dark pattern there, it's got less than 40 rings in it. So it's a very fast grown timber, and that seemed to be all the roof timbers very fast grown. This was actually a purlin that was cut off in the roof. So we got an opportunity there to actually count the rings, and we're very clear we can't use the science to tree ring date, unfortunately. But stylistically, we're pretty certain with the crown post there, sorry, crown strut, the blackening, the curved wind braces, it's likely to be around the 1480 mark. So that was the Red Lion. Another beautiful one, lots of timber framing, which again doesn't look much from the outside. This is just to the left of the Nissa Hall. It's that area there, and it extends along. Within is beautifully complete timber framing, again with a crown, sorry, not crown, a fan truss roof. So that helps narrow it down. We've got very decorative quadrifoil V struts here, beautiful surviving curved wind braces. But unfortunately, we couldn't get in here during the project, so we haven't got a tree ring date for this. But from all the features that have survived and are surviving in there, we can estimate the date again for Booth Hall. It's medieval, and it's likely around the 1480s it was constructed. So there's a whole group of buildings that are undated by tree ring analysis, but stylistically, with the help of the project, we've got Broad Street around the 1430s, the 1480s, the 1480s for the Red Lion, the 1480s for Booth Hall. We can see that there was a massive building in Newent around this period, between the sort of 1420s to the 1480s. So hopefully once the archives are unlocked and we can get in there and do some more research on the documentary evidence, we can look at this period and find out what was the economic impact that caused, you know, this building phase in Newent. It certainly seems to be the earliest buildings that we found there. So now we're going to move on to some post-medieval buildings in Newent. So hopefully I haven't lost you yet and you're keeping up. So we've been looking at early features, lots of curves in the walls, in the roofs, and lots of smoke blackening in the roof. Now we're moving to the post-medieval buildings. Hopefully when chimneys come in, so we shouldn't have so much smoke blackening in the roof, and you should see a change to straight, the use of straight timbers. So we've got a number of buildings up there showing you, and we're going to go through these one at a time. All the ones pictured there have been tree ring dated, bar the Market House, which is based on documentary evidence. So our first one, Lothlorien, if I just go back to the map, it's actually right up about a mile up Culvert Street, sorry. It's about a mile up there, so quite a way. And another building we'll be looking at later is Southern. So they're quite far out of the centre. And again, from the outside, we've got, you know, brick covering. You can't see a huge amount of timber framing, but it is there exposed on one wall So here we've got it with quite large panels, and we've got here a cruck, which is different to the box framing, the majority of the buildings that we've seen in Newent. And a cruck basically starts from the ground with a big timber going all the way up to the apex. It basically forms an A-frame. So it's not a box frame building, it's an A-frame. And we've only found 2 of these in Newent. So it's exciting to find them, and it's exciting to date them, as they tend to be early. But in this building, Loch-Lomond, we've got very few features on what to date stylistically or through tree ring analysis. Stylistically. So we haven't got many features to date this at all. You can see the apex of this cruck coming up here, and you can see this surviving wall beneath this apex. But other than that, there was very little in the entire building to actually stylistically date. So again, this is where tree ring analysis helps, where you've got very limited stylistic features to narrow it down. We've estimated here it was 1530s, but we really didn't have many features to go on. So tree ring analysis has helped us here. Sorry, the other cruck building is 5 Culver Street. So Loch-Lomond, for a tree ring date, we estimated it at 1530, and we get a tree ring date of 1564. So we're about 30 years out, but with barely 2 or 3 features to go on. I don't think that's too bad for a building. So we know they were using crucks at 1564, which is quite late. We're almost certain that the one at 5 Culver Street is earlier from the stylistic features, but we haven't been able to get in there to tree ring date it yet. Another building that we looked at on the High Street, Broad Street, sorry, is 31 to 33 Broad Street. Now this is a very recognisable one, and I mentioned decorative panelling before, and here you've got another example of it. This is the straight one, which is normally called herringbone decorative panelling, and it shows a good example of it here that everyone can see. We've also got jettying, which tends to be an earlier feature, but carries on for a while in use. It's got quite a large range. There was no smoke blackening in the roof. Here we're actually in the roof, the bottom 2 photos. So we don't think it's an open hall. We've got the jettying, which tends to be an earlier feature. We've got decorative panels, and we've got straight bracing in the walls. And it's quite difficult to see, but there are raking struts there and there for the roof, and we've got straight wind braces, so straight braces in the wall and straight in the roof. So looking at all those features, we've got no smoke blackening in the roof, so it's either smoke bay possibly or chimney, an early chimney house. We have got raking queen struts, and if you look at our line for raking queen struts here, it starts around the 1600s and then is used thereafter. We've got straight wind braces. There's our date range for straight wind braces. We've got the decorative panel, the herringbone, so we put it slap bang in the middle of that. We've got in this building straight braces, but they're used up to about 1600, or they come into fashion around 1600. So it could be, if we're estimating around 1600 mark, it could be that date. And we've got smaller panels on the front of the building. And we're just at the end of the common use of jettying, and this has got jettying. So if you put all those features together, is how we come up with our estimate of 1600 for this building, or how we did come up with it. Now, the actual date is 1581. So from our estimate, we're only, 19 years off. Now, so it seems to hold in Gloucester that decorative panelling fits nicely to that Elizabethan flowering around the 1580s, which is nice reinforcement that we know roughly what we're doing and we're on the right track. And maybe we can, narrow it down further with more research. Toad Hall is the next building we're looking at. This is just opposite the Market House. Outside, very few features, well, no features basically to give away that it's a timber frame building within. Once you get in there though, we have a smoke bay. So I don't know if you can see this collar here with peg holes or stave holes there. So it would have had a closed partition. And all of this is smoke blackened within this little bay, and the other side of it is not smoke blackened. So we know that smoke blackening is restricted to a small area in this building. We have raking struts again, an unusual feature, which personally I hadn't seen before, a W use of raking struts. And we've actually come across 2 of these on Newent. So it seems to be a Newent speciality or a style. I haven't come across them elsewhere yet, but they are raking, they're not straight. So they're certainly raking struts, which is what we know date ranges for. But more research to see if we can find more of these W trusses. No wind braces that we could find, and we've got curved wall braces, which tends to be an earlier feature, we were saying. But we do have this smoke bay. So looking at the features again, we've got a smoke bay and there's a smoke bay range. We have raking queen struts. So all in all, earlier than what we estimated raking queen struts to be. But in tree ring analysis of Tewkesbury, we've actually found raking queen struts right starting around 1550. So we were using some of our knowledge there to date this, estimate it earlier. We're right, we think, at the transition between curved braces, wind braces and straight braces, but there weren't any in this. Perhaps because they didn't know which to use, who knows. We haven't got decorative panelling surviving, we can't see because we've got brick frontage, but we do have some curved braces. We do have some small panels inside. So using all the features that we can see in this building, we've estimated as the project 1560. The tree ring date for it, 1590. So 30 years off on the estimation. It's quite a late smoke bay example. And I've just put the arrow there to show where the smoke bay is. So you can see the chimney there. They've actually inserted the later chimney in that bay. And then you've got 2 full bays as well. So it's a 2.5 bay building. Now we've only come across, I think it's in total 3 smoke bays in the whole of Gloucestershire so far. So it's great to actually find an example of a smoke bay. We'd be very excited if we can find some more. But it does fit in our expected date range when they were just introducing chimneys. So it all fits nicely for the project. Now we're coming to, or going back down Church Street to the Black Dog. And we're just looking at the left wing of it here, this nice external timber framing that you can see there. Shows a picture inside. We've got 2 vertical struts, so it's a queen strut roof. We've got, difficult to see here, but it is straight wind braces supporting the purlins. We've got straight wall braces, small panels, and no jettying on the front. So we're expecting to be later than the usual range of jettying. Jettying carrying on to around the 1600s. There was no smoke blackening that we could find in there, so we're expecting that we're in the chimney phase. We've got queen struts they use for a long period of time, so it doesn't really help narrow down the dating, but they've got straight wind braces, so it narrows it down. Straight wall bracing and the small panels, very small panels you can see on the outside, and nice straight bracing here. So our estimate from all these nice features was 1630s. Our tree ring date is exactly 1630. So it reinforces, you know, that the estimates that we're using are pretty much spot on in this case. It doesn't always work that nicely, but in this case, pretty much spot on. And a nice later use of timber framing, which is very exposed on the outside there. Now, we did have a number of post-medieval buildings that we couldn't date. They're just listed here. I'm just going to go through these quickly with the reasons why we couldn't date them. So 1 to 2, the High Street. We've got a main range on this side and a cross wing here. There's very little surviving original in the High Street in number 1 to the main range, but there is some smoke blackened timbers which would suggest it's maybe 1480s, but they also look as if they're reused, so I'm not confident on that. The cross wing, though, there's quite a bit of stylistic evidence there which suggests around the 1580s mark. We'd love to have tree ring dated this one, but it was a mixture of fast grown oak, which means it's got less than 50 rings, and elm. So we just simply couldn't get the samples out of it to tree ring date. So we can't date this one. It's got to be an estimate. Southerns, which doesn't look much behind the facade, but inside some surviving beams, and you can see these empty mortises for floor joists which have been removed and some major cross beams that have been removed, which we can reconstruct this pattern of joists and also going crossways. Now, this is called a checkerboard pattern of joist arrangement, which again tends to be around that same period of showing off with timber, the decorative wall panelling of around 1580s to 1600, 1620s. So that's what we've estimated it as. But nice to be able to reconstruct what the floor was just from a few empty mortises. Market House, we took some lovely cores from this, beautiful long sequences of about 150 rings. We were confident it was going to tree ring date, but unfortunately it's one of these examples that won't again. We do have a documentary date for construction at 1668. Now, looking at the outside of the building, it again is contradictory on some of it. In this picture here of 1840, the bracing looks curved in some places, straight in others. Today, the bracing on the outside is straight in all places. This is showing a wing that was added later. So this is what the earlier version would have looked like. So difficult. There's no concrete evidence that says the construction date is wrong of 1668, but the tree ring analysis just didn't reinforce that, and the stylistic date is confusing. So for now, we just have to go on that. But it's such a central building of Newent, I couldn't not show it. So it's only a documentary date we've got that. And so that's our summary of Newent. We've basically got a timber frame trail of 7 dendro buildings, 1 documentary on Market House, and 7 estimated buildings that we've been in. You can see some of these lighter coloured buildings that we haven't got into yet or we haven't examined, and there's plenty more in Newent, which hopefully we'll get into in the future and use the tree ring dates that we've got now to refine the dating even more. That's basically the summary of my results. If anyone wants a copy of this, just email me and I can send it to you. We would like, as part of the project, eventually to produce a leaflet showing the trail that you can follow, discussing some of the buildings, hopefully bringing in some of the documentary evidence, which we'd like to do. So this comes to the final bit of the lecture. It's just getting involved. So that's all the results we got so far. And that all happened in 2020, the tree ring dating. We would still like to do the lectures properly in face-to-face workshops and building recordings. So there's plenty more buildings out there that we want to get into and look at and record and date stylistically. We also need to do all this archive work. The archives have been shut down. We haven't been able to match any of these dates from the buildings with documentary evidence that might be available. And we're really keen to get people involved, volunteers, just to help with transcribing, visiting the archives with us and trying to understand how to transcribe documents, including wills and inventories. And you can contact us through the Gloucester Building Recording Group if you want to get involved with any of these aspects. And the other aspect I will say that's ongoing is we haven't actually completely stopped the tree ring dating. We've spent a portion funding from the lottery fund, but we've negotiated with our contractor tree ring analysis at a very discount subsidised rate of £400. And since we did the Tewkesbury lecture, which we mentioned this, we've had about 6 people say that they're interested in having their buildings dating. So we can't say that the project, the dating aspect of the project is finished yet. So we've got 6 more buildings that we're going to get results for in Tewkesbury. Hopefully we'll get a few more in Newent as time goes on, and hopefully some more in Gloucester. But hopefully in 2021, we will be able to do the lectures and workshops on recording, understanding buildings, taking photographs, anything you like that. So if you would like to get involved or learn more about recording, I've only summarised some of these things. There's an awful lot more to learn. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the results for Newent. Thank you.